Good afternoon and Happy New Year. I'm Charlotte BernersLee and I manage the FS Club here at ZN. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our first webinar of 2022, which I can only bring to you thanks to the generosity of our sponsors, who will allow us to range widely and freely across technology, economics and finance. Today we are privileged to hear from Andrew Jenkinson, the CEO of CyberSec Innovation Partners, on the important but too often neglected topic of how secure are your websites, the enigma of digital certificates. Firstly, before I hand over to our expert speaker, some brief housekeeping points. The slides are available for you to download in the chat box and on our website. We'll also be holding a 20-minute Q&A session after Andrew's presentation, so please use the GoToWebinar chat facility to send your questions in to me and I'll feed them into the conversation. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. I thought it was 5 past. It's 1 minute past. You're so fast. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me, to Michael and the rest of the team there at ZN and the FS Club. Today I want to look at a number of things, but my job and my role, if you will, is to demystify and simplify encryption and internet, which includes website connectivities and subdomains, etc. So the question we pose to the world really is, how secure are your internet connections and websites? Could we go to the first slide, please, Peter? Many people here will know around 80 years ago that the original code breakers actually were responsible for decrypting the encrypted machine, the cipher machine called Enigma. This was widely used in the Second World War for encrypting messages throughout the German military forces. And the bit that most people don't actually realize is the only constant within each and every message, and there were thousands of them, was Heil Hitler at the end of each message. This enabled the William Tutte and his team to take these messages and to decrypt that, to then enable them to decrypt. The messages were encrypted each and every time, but if you think of a simple form of A became B and B became C and C became D and so on, when Heil Hitler was written with 7 different letters, it enabled them to actually track that encrypted capability to decrypt at the other end. The brilliant work by Alan Turing and his team led on to the work by William Tutte. William Tutte was a BT engineer before that, which is quite incredible, and just a very humble man. Went on to be an incredibly famous man, but nowhere near as famous as Alan Turing. But nonetheless, his work led to the development of Colossus, which actually deciphered and decrypted the work of the Lorenz machine, which had many more permutations than the original Enigma machine. The work that these guys did at Bletchley Park has become famous, and a lot of people have watched the film, etc., which has a certain amount of poetic license, but nonetheless, the work they did saved countless lives, thousands of lives. Some 70 million plus people died in the Second World War, so it's quite an important thing. Second slide, please, Peter. As things progressed, it was always going to be inevitable that the transition and the evolution of the internet and the digital communication would lead to the invent of emails. And in 1971, Ray Tomlinson actually developed the first email. He sent it to himself. We actually were awarded a top 10 company in the UK for innovation in the digital cryptography and the cybersecurity world a couple of years ago, and it was actually on the 50th anniversary of the first email. And I actually took a long point of making the situation aware to everyone, because nobody actually knew it. It's an incredible day. Today, in actual fact, the statistic we're quoting here in 2020 is over 300 billion emails are sent a day, every day. Okay, this is an incredible statistic. There are over 2 billion websites in the world today. A lot of them aren't used. An interesting stat that might be worth people making a note of is NASA have 23,699 websites. About 600 of them are live, the rest of them are orphan, but they need to be secure. Next slide, please, Peter. We're moving on now swiftly into an area. I don't want to overcomplicate this, so I'm going to try and keep it as simple as possible, but public key infrastructure started to be developed around the 70s and started to roll out mainly in the agencies and government, so they could actually have secure communications between themselves. And the emergence of Whitfield Diffie and Martin Hellman, you'll be familiar with these protocols and usage potentially. Just trust me that these protocols have become the gold standard for communication, for encryption and decryption. But if you think of public key infrastructure, PKI, that you'll hear me mention, this is like a digital passport. So PKI is based upon encrypted keys and digital certificates. Think of it as a passport that's a digital passport, whereby if you let 1 million people into your country, you'd want to see 1 million passports. You would not want to take a chance and let half of them through, for example, without any authentication. And this is what PKI does. It authenticates the device and the person so that digital communication can take place in a secure manner. Very important. If you wanted to go into the history, I'd be delighted to, but when the Cold War was around, people were going to extreme lengths, bugging hinges, bugging computers, bugging IBM typewriters to try and get the information before it was encrypted so that they didn't have to try and decrypt it the other end. That's what PKI does for you. It encrypts and decrypts, much the same as the Enigma machine, hence the relationship. But unlike the Enigma machine, once it's cracked, you can upgrade your PKI and your digital certificates to make sure that you are using the most latest protocols and security. Hopefully that covers that a little bit, but nothing works, nothing is secure if the PKI is compromised. It's really, really quite critical. Next slide, please, Peter. If we were in a room full of people, I'd ask you all to put your hand up who knew this guy or recognize this guy. This is Tim Berners-Lee, and he launched in 1991 the first website, info@cern.ch. And as most of you will know or will easily find out, what Tim Berners-Lee was doing was working for a Swiss entity that was working within the academic and the government areas, again, so that they could share intelligence gathering and academic papers with the fraternity. At the beginning, it was never considered to be something that would be rolled out worldwide for everybody to use. And in there lies some challenges that we will look at in a short while. You'll see at the footnote there I said that we are now learning the consequences of not addressing security seriously. This is a really quite a key point here, because let me explain that to you. Would you leave your whatever car, you know, your brand new Aston Martin, in a high crime risk area with the keys in the ignition and leave it for 2 years? The answer, of course, is no, you wouldn't, because you wouldn't expect it to be there when you come back. But the reality is that's what we're doing with websites today. People are launching them, publishing them with website developers, with experts, but they're not checking the security, and they are leaving it for 2 years for the duration of a certificate, ideally 1 year, but sometimes 2 years, and nobody's checking. And the companies are being infiltrated digitally, and data is being extracted unbeknown to the companies. We touched on that before we actually came on there, Charlotte. Next slide, please. This is a harrowing slide, and I make no apologies for it, but the reality is what had happened from the 70s, 80s and 90s brought us into a position whereby the governments, predominantly the NSA and GCHQ that we'll all be familiar with, actually saw the opportunities and the dangers of the internet and the expedited development of it and communication ability. What they also saw was this particular danger of how they could try and control it so it couldn't be used for nefarious activities, and they struggled with that. What then happened in 2001, I can remember it in my first book, I've written a chapter about it. I can remember exactly where I was the day of the Twin Tower attack. And this changed everything. So what the governments were doing up until that time were working very diligently with a nucleus core team of experts, trying to work out how the internet worked, trying to control it, trying to maximize it. You'll see I'm not using the word manipulate or abuse, that came later. But the reality is they wanted to have some governance and control of it, and it was like a tiger by the tail. It was not easy to control. When the Twin Towers happened under Bush, President Bush and his team, they decided from that day on that they needed to take the war on terror by the scruff of the neck and actually take some control of the digital space, because nothing would ever be the same again. It's a very strong case I make here, because I've written about this very recently. The Chinese have started using autonomous weaponry, which is certainly going to happen in the cyber war space that we're moving too rapidly towards. What actually happened at 9/11, you don't need terrorists anymore. You can just take over command and control, known as C2, of planes, ships, and semi-autonomous and autonomous vehicles to use as you wish if the PKI is compromised. We've had discussions with the Ministry of Defense and the FBI on these issues. It's very, very important. Authentication is key for any security. If you don't know who you're talking to and someone's taken control of that security channel, unbeknown to you because of the compromised position in the PKI websites or servers, you actually lose all control. So the game was changed from 9/11 to the government saying we are hell bent on taking control in this area, and billions upon billions of dollars were spent. Next slide, please, Peter. You'll see here we've listed just some, and in 2013, Edward Snowden wrote his first book, who was obviously a CIA operative. At the time, it's very interesting if you know about this particular part of history. What the governments were doing, predominantly the US, were hiring consultants. This gave them plausible deniability, but nonetheless, projects and programs like PRISM, Fairfax, Quantum Insert, and hundreds more are all, you can search on these anywhere you wish, and you'll find exactly what they did. But what they were doing was manipulating the internet and connectivity to enable them to digitally eavesdrop. If you read Edward Snowden's book, immaterial of your views on him, if you read his book, what it tells you is that around 2008, 2009, the same time as Stuxnet actually occurred, the first digital weapon against Natanz Iranian nuclear program, what it tells you is that in the early 2000s, there was this migration from typical eavesdropping to digital eavesdropping. So from analog, where they were passing messages and listening to people and trying to capture some bugs on phones, etc., they moved into what was known as the real digital age. And it became known within the NSA and other organizations in the governments that all you needed was an IP address or a laptop or a mobile, and they could actually eavesdrop anywhere around the world on pretty much anyone. We've all read about the German minister being eavesdropped on and other senior politicians around the world. That's how they actually were doing it, because if you stop and think about all of the connectivity to what's going on in the world today, pretty much everything's funneled through an American IP provider, Google, Yahoo, whomever, and it's going through a certain channel to actually create mass data surveillance. Next slide, please, Peter. In 2013, 2014, because of the increase, and everyone listening, I'm sure, will recall this, but around this time, there was a sudden upsurge of cyber attacks. And 20 years ago, it was not really heard of, but 10 years ago, 9-10 years ago, it was becoming an increasing challenge and causing a destabilized economy, and it was going only one way. So the major web providers, Google, Mozilla, Firefox, and other internet service providers got together and decided that the original hypertext transfer protocol, known as HTTP, you'll see it in the bottom right-hand corner, was actually already broken. So websites and internet connections were easily breached and easily hacked, and between them, they decided they'd upgrade HTTP to HTTPS. Like all things security, it takes forever, which is an absolute nightmare and causes a lot of angst. But nonetheless, in 2018, some 4.5 years later, HTTP was deprecated, so it was no longer accepted, and replaced with HTTPS. Now, there's a number of real critical issues there to take on board, and I'll try and cover these very simply for you in broad brushstrokes. HTTP can use port 80 and it will not use the latest SSL protocols. Okay, so it'll use 1.0, 1.1, whereas HTTPS uses 1.2, 1.3 and uses all the modern protocols. You'll see this in a website. There's a slide in a minute. You'll see that we're all familiar. We look in the website and you'll see a little gray padlock. That means it's using HTTPS. It doesn't necessarily mean you're secure, but it does mean it's using the latest authentication and encryption techniques. Okay, I'll touch on that in a minute. Paradoxically, sorry, put my teeth in. What that actually did, and in my second book, I write about this, the day HTTP was deprecated, I believe was the day that we saw the incredible increase in the identified companies that were no longer maintaining secure websites. What was meant to be improvement of security was actually exposing those that were not secure and not migrating to the upgraded HTTPS. Google went a little bit further, and Google announced publicly that they would embarrass companies that did not move to HTTPS. Now, for the companies that take this on the chin, they sometimes get a little bit, upset about this. But equally, what Google were trying to do is to protect their customers and visitors to the website. So there's this very much carrot and cane scenario. Equally, Google would relegate any HTTP on a search engine position. So it's very important to understand the rationale behind it, much the same as the rationale behind the NSA's 2001 attitude towards trying to take control. It was to stop terrorists communicating digitally, or to at least know what they were planning. Next slide, please. In David Sanger's book, if you don't know David Sanger, he's an author and he writes for the New York Times and Washington Post. He's an expert in this field and a very nice chap too. He actually quotes the saying, "The monster has been turned on its creator." And if you stop and think about that, and we've got this great picture I pulled together of a red carpet, which is a VIP type of easy pass in. Websites today are being used en masse to infiltrate organizations because they are not secure. And there's a number of reasons for that. And I won't go into them too much here because it's quite technical, but even the security professionals don't fully understand what security is when it comes to websites. There's a definite lack of controls and management, and it's something you can't just leave and fix and forget and come back to in 2 years' time and expect it to be fine. It's a living, breathing thing. People want to benefit from the exposure and the footfall of websites, but very few are willing to do all they should do to make sure they're secure. We've only got to read the paper every day. We've got cyber attacks going on, and I think 3 weeks ago the Police UK were attacked, and last year the Ministry of Defence were attacked, and just before Christmas the Department for Transport. So this is not a hypothesis, this is happening on a daily basis. We actually say this: it's never been harder for authorities and governments and regulators to attribute criminal activity to anything other than a region or possibly a group. And you'll all read the reports. It was a Russian attack, a China attack. You'll hear that all the time, and very few people ever get caught. What we do see is that companies get fined for personal identifiable information, PII data theft, because their websites aren't as secure as they need to be. And this is a real message we try to convey to everyone we speak to on a daily basis, at government level, at MOD level, at police level, and companies. So there is a much better way, but we need to make that transition from much the same as HTTP to HTTPS, from HTTPS to daily monitoring, or at least management and controls that don't let these things occur. and they happen on a regular basis. 30,000 websites are attacked every day. 30,000. Okay. I was just telling Charlotte before we joined the conversation, the first county in America got hacked. It's been announced yesterday. All of their nearly 1 million residents cannot use any computers. The entire government's been shut down. I'm trying to reach out to them. I think I'll find that when I write this up in a few days' time, when it comes back online, they've been using port 80, which is the old HTTP, and they've not migrated to HTTPS. This is a common challenge. So they've been easily exposed and exploitable. The exposure bit is really important to understand for everyone. When that not secure website text is showing in the address bar, and I'm sure you've all seen it, you may have ignored it, but I'm sure you've all seen it, it actually means it's exposed, vulnerable, and exploitable. Okay, there are training courses people can take to exploit these situations, and it was the go-to certification for governments and agencies. Okay, so read between the lines on that, and you'll understand where the challenge comes from. Don't get me wrong, I don't care which government wants to understand what I'm doing or check what I'm up to. But when it comes to a private entity, a company that's being used and exposed and then exploited, costing tens if not hundreds of millions in losses and damages, we need to protect against that. I've written a chapter on Travelex. Again, if I was to ask a show of hands of all the attendees, we'd all know Travelex. Well, Travelex went from a flotation in May 2019 to a cyber attack in December 2019 to administration in April 2020 to being sold for $1 in 2020 December. So in 18 months, it went from $3 billion to $1 because of a cyber attack and other situations that occurred throughout that period of time. But that's the situation we're faced with. It's not a hypothesis. This is happening today. The next slide, everybody, it actually says fact one, increasing numbers of websites. And we've got a little graphic, a pie chart here. You'll get to see it, I'm sure, as it'll come up in a second. Back in 2000, there were less than 200,000 websites, okay? And you'll see the curve, the trajectory actually is just like a bell and going up and up and up. The statistics on here only go to 2018. It was all we could find, but now we've got 2 billion websites. Okay, so the target area is massive. And although my statistic of 30,000 websites a day being attacked is an alarming number, it's a fraction of the total. Okay. Really important message here also is a company, I quoted the NASA earlier, too many N's. NASA have 23,699. Each one, if connected, needs to be secure. Security does not flow down the chain or up the chain, but insecurity does. Does that make sense? So if a subdomain, i.e. a domain that's been launched for a product or service that's secondary to the main homepage, if it's connected, which invariably it will be because people want to capture the data and the information being shared, people do not want to log in twice or share their information twice, the websites are connected and share data. Consequently, oh, it's just us. Consequently, there we go, fantastic. You'll see the curve here, and as I say, if we could extend that, we'd be taking some information and we'd have to populate it, but we know there are over 2 billion websites today, so you can see the curve going up. Since the pandemic, really important piece here, since the pandemic, people have been more reliant on the internet for business, for commerce, for communications. It's an incredible thing, and we've become totally reliant. Okay, can you do the next slide, Charlotte, please? I think Peter's lost connection. Fantastic.
Thank you. Back now.
Oh, good. Welcome back, Peter. What you see here is fact two, increase in cybercrime. Now, in other presentations, we've laid one over the other, and you can see there's a direct correlation between the numbers of websites and the increasing cyber losses. Last year, we lost around $6 trillion, both in costs and losses, to cyber crime, making it the world's third largest global economy behind China and the US. I think the US is around 18 trillion, China's around 14 trillion. China want to overtake America, and I think they're headed the right way currently for what they're doing. But that statistic at the bottom should worry every single one of you. For every dollar spent online in 2021, $2 was lost to cybercrime. That's the scary, unsustainable position that we're facing, and it's because of our insecure websites and internet. Next slide, please, Peter. You're showing off now. This is the final fact I'm going to share with you. If any of you don't know HackerOne, HackerOne are one of the three leading organizations in this space. You've got OWASP and you've got MITRE CWE, which we helped last year when they themselves were guilty of running and maintaining not secure websites. And you've got HackerOne. HackerOne went further last year in their independent report that stated 96% of hackers hack websites. Okay, so this is not a CIP statistic or slide. This is a HackerOne 2021 statistic and slide that says from 2020 at 71%, which was incredibly high already, of hackers hacking websites, is now 96%. So literally, without exception, all these other little ones underneath the websites in the pink upright column, they don't add up to the same amount of people that are hacking websites. There is no coincidence. We actually lay claim to this, and I think we're possibly one of the world's leading experts in this field. There's no coincidence that of the research of over 1,000, and it's increasing every day, of companies or organizations that have suffered a cyber attack, we have evidenced their websites' insecure positions across the board. When CNA Insurance announced their breach and paid 40 million ransom last year, they notified the world on a not secure displayed website. So again, going back to it, it wasn't a padlock in their website. It just said not secure, cna.com, we've been hacked. And you know, this is so embarrassing. It's school child error. So what we say to everyone is, look, you must shut these front doors or else somebody's going to walk straight through to them, like the red carpet slide earlier. Next slide, please, Peter. So the warning signs, if we look in the picture, and my friend did this, my colleague did this for me, so we're landscape as opposed to a non-landscape. The notsecurewebsite.com, in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see, look, it's highlighted the not secure. What will happen from this meeting? I'm sure people will start looking at websites in a very different way and going, oh my God, there's a not secure. This typically happens and people start emailing me saying, Andy, I found a not secure website here, there. This is not unusual, but please listen. This is a major faux pas. This is the international sign of a total lack of controls and management of security that actually renders the organization and the website and organization totally open to exposed exploitable positions and vulnerabilities. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you are like one of the companies we speak to on a regular basis, that they do show a padlock. It doesn't mean that they are secure. It just confirms that it is using HTTPS and the website has authentication. It doesn't mean the website's configured correctly or that it can't be hacked. There is a major difference. We actually, when we write reports on these things, we say an SSL, which is secure socket layer, an SSL test taken in isolation is not worth taking, okay, because it will give a false positive. You have to look at the entire thing. I've avoided in this presentation showing these, but very happy to share redacted reports with people to show exactly where the problems lie, because there's a lot of complexity to understanding website security and actually being able to remediate them. Next slide, please.
Sorry to interrupt you there,
Yeah.
Andrew. We're running to time, so if you can wrap
Sure.
things up.
I think this is the last slide, is it not, Peter? I think it's penultimate slide. Very quickly then, these are just some examples. SolarWinds, everyone must have heard of. They were maintaining not secure subdomains. I wrote a paper for the Intelligence Senate Committee showing them exactly what happened, and it was proved to happen sometime later. Colonial Pipeline, again, exactly the same situation. The Vatican, we helped, and we were published in the Catholic Times on that. JBS, all of these companies are maintaining not secure positions of their websites or their subdomains and were subsequently hacked. Over 1,000 companies. Final slide, please. Again, I've written about Travelex there, I've written about CNA, I've mentioned that, the CASIA supply chain. Really important issue here, supply chain security is a key issue, because if you've got a supplier, the police force announced this, it's public domain, I'm not saying anything that's not out there. The Police UK announced that a company called NDI Tech actually was hacked back in October, which meant the police national computer got hacked. That's a contentious issue as far as I'm concerned, but nonetheless, third-party suppliers is a real key issue that you've got to make sure that you've got control of, or at least the third party have control of, with requisite delivery capability and assurances in place. Otherwise, it's going to be the same scenario. The SolarWinds hacked 18,000 customers after they were hacked. That's the knock-on effect. It's like a domino effect. I think that for us, that's as good as we need to get on this presentation, Charlotte. Hopefully we've tried to keep in some time.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you very much, Andrew. I think that was certainly a wake-up call for many of us. Please do keep sending your questions in using the chat facility, and I'll kick things off. So we hear a lot about email phishing attacks in the news. Is there a correlation there with website security, and would securing your website make these attacks less possible?
Yeah, really great question, whoever sent that. The reality is, people, just to confirm, websites are like an ecosystem, and websites rely on a number of different servers. You may have an MX server for mail exchange, you may have a CN name, a web server for a canonical name. There are several different types of servers. What typically happens, and this happened at the FBI only in November last year, where their website was not secure, the access was gained to a mail exchange MX server, and 100,000 emails sent from the FBI server, but not the FBI, went to unsuspecting people and companies. And in there were links of nefarious activity and code and injection, etc., that would cause further distress. So typically now, most companies are pretty savvy when it comes to external email, but equally at the same time, what the cyber criminals have managed to do is to understand they need to get to the server, particularly the mail exchange server, so they can look as if they're one of the internal people sending emails. It's a really key distinction that not that many people understand, but certainly need to. But great question.
Thank you. Okay, so N. Wadey has asked, are third-party hosting platforms like HeroQ secure?
Without checking, I'd be second guessing. But if I was a client of any of these companies, and whether it be a Blackboard, whether it be a SolarWinds, a FireEye, or any company, I would want to do my own assurances. It's again a very interesting question, because the Travelex merger, acquisition, and also the flotation, what would people do differently if they knew that the company was not secure when it floated for $3 billion and being sold for $1 18 months later? Possibly they changed their investment strategy. I think it's key that a number of third-party suppliers aren't taking security as seriously as they should. And the case in point is NDI Tech, where the police PNC computer got breached. And when we did some research, we found that NDI Tech were suboptimally secure.
Okay. Next one is from Michael Chan, who asks, would a VPN help us from unsecured websites or hacking?
Again, it's one of those things. We've done some research on some VPNs, and they're not as secure as you'd like them to be. So if you are, it's a bit like an insurance policy. If an insurance company is secure, you'd like to think they're mitigating your situation. But if they're not secure, they're actually adding to it. Okay, so you've got a false positive. You lean on the crutch and it breaks as soon as you put weight on it. A VPN without checking, I would always err on the side of caution and say, I'd like to check their security before I actually jump into bed with them. It's one of those questions we get posed all the time, Charlotte, and it's, again, a great question. I believe we will find at the present time, we migrated from HTTP to HTTPS in 2013, 2018. It doesn't tell anyone they are secure on that website, just some elements. We need to raise the bar. And what should happen, in my opinion, I'm in talks with Google and other companies, what we should be doing is saying, with a red flashing light, it may have a valid SSL, but it's not secure. Please take your business somewhere else, because they're not taking security of their business or your business, sensibly or seriously. So I check. And Charlotte, just to finish on that, if people want to ask and say, Andy, could you check this? Could you check that? This is what we do for a living. We'd be very, very happy to do so to prevent intrusion that leads to cyber attacks.
And Andrew's details are up on the slide there now as well, so you can contact him. Another question here from John Spain. I think this is in relation to your slide about the first website. He said, wasn't Do Defense from the US the first to set up a shareable network?
Could you repeat that, Charlotte, please? I missed some of that.
So he said, wasn't Do Defense, and then he's got brackets, US, the first to set up a shareable network?
Yeah, I believe they were, but there's a lot of people making lots of claims. But again, we're in the business of security, and we just suggest everyone checks anyone they're working with and their own businesses, that they check their own security.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we did this for SolarWinds, when SolarWinds were hacked, it's the biggest story, and as you know, my little book here, Stuxnet to Sunburst, is about the original digital warfare of Stuxnet, and also the biggest, largest cyber attack, Stuxnet, SolarWinds, which is called Sunburst, the code. Controls and management weren't in place, and SolarWinds is a cybersecurity company offering security services to the world's biggest companies, including the US government. It is very easy to lose sight and overlook security at the juncture where companies connect to the internet, and we know the internet's been weaponized for 20 years. If you ignore and just take that chance, you are literally running the gauntlet. And you mustn't do that, no matter who the company is. The police force, the UK police, have had a cyber intrusion with 13 million people's data being sold on the dark web. I know they're now saying it's being stopped, but it was published on the dark web and they still have that data. It was because of a lack of internet security of domains and subdomains at both entities, and neither knew. So it highlights a control and management issue that people aren't even aware of. And don't even start me on domain name systems, because most people don't even know what they are. But they're critical.
Can I ask, can you explain the difference between a domain name system and just a regular, straightforward website?
Yeah, what happens is a small company will only have typically a handful of websites, and they may be using port 80, port 443, etc. That's a great picture. I'm going to try and emulate that. And they may be managing through a domain name system operation. That could be Akamai, Cloudflare, Amazon Web Services. It could be any of those companies. So what typically happens is, to save the latency, i.e. the timing, they will use a DNS that's got servers all around the world. Okay, and that DNS provider will take the content from their websites and pump it around through their network and servers around the world. It's their job to distribute that content, if you will. It's not necessarily, unless it's in the contract, their job to make sure it's secure. Okay, there's a major difference. And we again, this is a misconception we hear on a daily basis. Somebody says, oh, well, I outsource my DNS or my hosting to Squarespace or Cloudflare or whomever. And they may well do. But it doesn't mean, if you read the small print, even when it's into cloud exploit scenario, it doesn't mean they're taking responsibility for the security. And if you read the small print, typically it'll say joint shared reliability and responsibility. Okay, so if you populate, and we see this every single day, you'll get somebody who's done incredible graphics like our owl here, or video content or something. Last year, we helped the Canadian government when they were hacked and their websites were using HTTP code for their flags. They were using a third party that actually wrote the code, which was not secure, which was then adopted for every website, which made and relegated each website to be not secure. Remember, security doesn't go up the chain, but insecurity does. And the hackers are looking for the weakest, lowest hanging fruit and opportunity. Does that help? Does it answer it?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's a bit terrifying to think about, though.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But it's important, and we've just had some feedback that it's been a fascinating talk, and thanks to you for your thoughtful answers to the questions. So thank you so much, Andrew, for giving us your time and expertise today. And once again, thank you to our sponsors for making these webinars possible. And most importantly, thank you to our audience for your attention and input today. So you'll see that we have a wide variety of webinars coming up to keep your mind growing in 2022. And you can also now listen to our webinar audio on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. Just search for the FS Club. And do check out our website, cn.com, for more thought-provoking content. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.